How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to be talking about medical escorts and transports. It seems to be a trend in the news right now where there seems to be a lot of inmates that are going out and getting medical, and then for some reason, they seem to break free. There could be a lot of reasons. We're going to go ahead and explain what some of those reasons could be, but then we're going to break down what we feel would be good practice. And hopefully it's complying with your policy. Don't forget, we're just making recommendations. Your policy and procedure comes first. But hopefully the things we suggest, people will see that as good practices. And if they're not implementing it, then maybe they can add it to their policy and procedure. My guest today is going to be Joe Pomponio. But before I bring him on, just want to go over our sponsors. Inmate Manipulation Decoded. This book is doing very well. It's very successful. Basically, it fills in that gap when it comes to training people on inmate manipulation. Actually, I'd like to read a recent review I just got from this book that I thought was pretty cool. I got surprised with a review the other day, and for me, this is the reason why I wrote the book. Person's name is Joe Hartung, and he says it's a must-read for all new corrections officers. It's been 3 years, and I still recommend this book to everyone that I met and talked to that's joining the corrections field. You will read a chapter on Monday and see it play out on Tuesday on your pod. I read it 6 times in my first 8 weeks on the job. It's a paperback and small enough to fit in your BDU leg pocket. No excuses to not know what to expect when it comes to inmate manipulation. Knowledge is power. Don't let the inmates have that power. Read this book. And no, I don't know him. I didn't pay for that. That was a legit, good, solid feedback. And I love the fact that he said that he reads it and then he sees it play out the next day. That's the key behind what we do. We also have American Military University. If you guys get a chance, if you're looking to get a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They are very supportive of what we do in corrections, also very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk. And it was great because I was watching a Zoom call, and there was an officer that was on the Zoom call that just mentioned she is finishing her degree at American Military University in criminal justice. So I thought that was pretty cool. So again, guys, let's bring experience into the classrooms. And this book is doing very well. How to Succeed in Corrections. This book is available through Blue 360 Media. The link to that is also in the description. Guys, a lot of information in this book. A lot of information. Definitely something that will be good for you if you're looking to make this a career. And then I have another book coming out shortly with the same publishing company, Blue 360 Media. And it's going to complement this book. It will, but it's going to be geared more towards rookies. But it does require a little senior officer finesse because sometimes we need to translate those lessons. I know someone once said, wouldn't it be great to look back at, with the knowledge you have now and look back and be able to teach yourself as a rookie? It's like, yeah, it would be great, but I don't know if as a rookie I'd understand the knowledge. So it's good to have that translator, that senior officer who's going to pick up that book as well, read the lessons learned, maybe even pick up a few things themselves, and then translate that. Either way, everything in these books are meant to be discussion worthy. I mean, literally, one topic alone you could be talking about for hours. It's just that detail. That's really developed from the dialogues that we've had on these channels. On this channel, Tier Talk. Let me get Joe. There he is. What's up, Joe?
Hey, morning, Anthony. How are you, brother?
Good. Thank you. Kind of last minute. Corrections One is going to post this video. It's kind of a trending topic, so I appreciate, obviously taking time out of your day to get this out so I could post it up. It'll be good information that we're going to provide today.
Awesome, man. Not a problem. Always glad to help out.
And do you mind introducing yourself again, Joe?
My name is Joe Pomponio. I'm a retired lieutenant from the Texas Department of Corrections of 30 years. I'm currently working for local sheriff's department in their jail division. And I'm also a panel member here on Tier Talk.
And we love having you, Joe. What I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to show you a quick 1 minute and 23-second video just to kind of let you know that these escape from hospital transports are happening. We're going to go look at an escape real quick from Kaitlin Armstrong. It's a high-profile case just happened a couple of days ago. But again, guys, sadly, this seems to be one of many. But I just want to kind of use this to reference why we're doing the topic. But again, it's not going to be the focus of our dialogue, not the specific Kaitlin Armstrong case, but we're going to focus more on policies, procedures, and practices. So this is just for reference purposes. We're not really commenting on it, but then we'll go ahead and have our discussion about what we feel are good practices and maybe not so good practices, and also give an understanding of why we do what we do on a deeper level, because sometimes that's not always discussed. So let me go ahead and get the screen up.
New details tonight about the attempted escape of a Travis County murder suspect. Court documents show that investigators believe Kaitlin Armstrong planned her escape on Wednesday.
An off-duty TCSO has an inmate that's running away from him.
She briefly got away from Travis County Corrections officers during a doctor's office visit in South Austin. She tried to jump a fence, but a corrections officer pulled her down. They both fell. Then they say she got up and started running again. 2 officers caught her. Both were injured during that incident. And they say Armstrong was wearing thermal pants under her jail uniform and had planned to use those to disguise the fact that she's an inmate. Investigators went back and reviewed jail footage and say Armstrong had been working out vigorously for the past few months. They also say they found dental floss and a metal pen in her cell. So they believe she'd been planning her escape for quite a while. Armstrong is accused of killing pro cyclist Anna Mariah Wilson in May of 2022. She's been in jail since her capture in Costa Rica a month after Wilson's death. So in addition to her murder charge and a theft charge, Armstrong now faces a felony escape charge. Jury selection in her trial is set to start on October 30th.
At first, I just want to say something before we go into this topic. Hindsight bias. It's amazing how people are able to look at things, see things differently based on the new context, and then try to judge us for missing something. Okay, so she was working out vigorously. A lot of inmates work out vigorously because there's not much to do. And then, she had a pen and floss. Okay, those are items they're probably able to have. But now, in context, okay, I get it. But let's just be wary that we're using hindsight bias here. We're using knowledge that we have and then looking back and trying to hold people accountable. Like, yeah, you should have figured that out. No, these are common routines. Yeah, an inmate's working out vigorously. Yeah, okay, that's every day. That's every inmate. So let's go ahead and accuse every inmate of possibly escaping. It's just, and I don't know where the dental floss and pen comes in. Maybe that's a way to jimmy the cuffs, but she still had the cuffs on. So, but I'm just saying, hindsight bias. But all right, Joe. So this will be a unique dialogue. I just wanted to show that, not to talk about, but let people know this is why we're having the topic. It is a recent event, and I figure that now this makes what we're going to talk about a little bit more relevant. There are other cases, obviously, that we could pull from lately because there seems to be a lot. But just letting you guys know of the one I think is strong enough for us to have the dialogue. I went back and I wanted to look at some articles that I thought covered the topic well that we could kind of lean on a little bit. And there was an article from a gentleman named Joel Lashley. Now, Joel Lashley, now this article, by the way, first was written in 2009. So Joel Ashley's been out of the business for quite some time. Joel Ashley has worked in public safety professional for 25 years, including 17 years of service in the healthcare setting. Joel leads the training program for hospital, clinical, and social outreach staff and violence awareness, prevention, and management. I think he's a person from the outside, doesn't work in the profession, but does have some level of understanding in safety and security, because I guess he may do something for the hospitals at that level. I try to get a contact with him, try to call Corrections One, try to call the business he works for. This gentleman's tough to get in contact with, but I am going to borrow some of his expertise. And then me and Joe can try to expand on that. Now, mind you guys, policies and procedures are really dictated by state laws. So some states may be different. So we're just going to go ahead and discuss it. And if it applies, it applies. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But having said that, I think that what he mentions in this article is at least discussion worthy. And if your state can't do it, maybe it's a good chance to revisit it and then, put some effort in letting the state know why this could be important if there has to be any changes made. Now, real quick, Joe, if you had to define, just for people on the outside watching this, hospital escort, hospital transport, whatever, how would you go ahead and define that real quick?
Well, I mean, your basic hospital transport is transporting an offender from one facility to another, whether it be from a prison unit or a county jail or a city jail to a medical facility. Hospital escorts here in Texas are basically defined as escorting an offender on foot from one part of the unit to another to a medical facility. So, it varies by state, and a lot of it dictates on how their facilities are set up.
Yeah, and I want to mention something here. Let me get myself back on the screen. So, at the very beginning, what got my attention with this article was what he said at the very beginning is, and I'll put this article in the description, the link to the article. He says at any given moment, there are prisoners inside a hospital, sometimes several. The only other public place that can claim these numbers is a courtroom. But unlike a courtroom, most hospitals lack a uniformed armed presence, metal detectors, and holding cells. When transport officers bring prisoners to a hospital, they're effectually on their own. In fact, a typical hospital is the only unprepared environment that is an integral component of the criminal justice system. Correction officers receive scant training to prepare them for the clinical setting, which is why officers, bystanders, and medical personnel are often hurt and even killed by prisoners, patients, or forensic patients. It's also why so many inmates escape from hospitals. This to me was powerful because I mean, it's funny because you know that going in, but you never had someone explain it. But they're right. The hospitals are a part of the criminal justice system. If there's a medical concern, you are going to take that inmate to a hospital if it's required. You're not going to say, hey, they're going to have a heart attack, but they can't go to a hospital. We'll let them die here. No, they're going to be going out. So I love the fact that he mentions that, hospitals really aren't prepared security-wise to take these inmates in, which means that we, as custody and control, have to find the balance, right? Because if they're not offering safety and security, we have to step up our measures. And that's sort of what this article is about. But Joe, was that not on point, that beginning right there?
That was absolutely on point, absolutely powerful, because, hospitals are not designed with a correctional setting in mind. They think about the usual midnight drunks that come in that, the PD or the SO may bring in to get medically cleared before they send them to, to county or city jail. But yeah, I mean, that was absolutely on point because, as common as medical transports and escorts are for us in a correctional setting, the public thinks that this is something that's routine, and it's really not, because in a correctional setting, we don't send them to hospitals unless we absolutely have to. If it's something that we can't take care of within our own medical facility. So for him to say what he said regarding that was totally on point because, like I said, hospitals weren't designed for a correctional setting in mind. They were designed to treat the public and, give each person who's there privacy and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, that was absolutely powerful. I love that.
Yeah, and I'm going to be reading off the article because a lot of it is his words, and I want to make sure we get his words out there, and then we can also comment in addition to that. But I want to make sure that, because I couldn't get the guy on, I wanted to make sure that we express his thoughts, and then we could build on those thoughts. Because again, this gentleman who wrote this article, hopefully he sees the video. I did try to reach out to you. I called the company, but maybe one day we could even do a discussion with you on it. And I mind you, I think this guy is, again, from the outside looking in, but he does have experience in hospital security. So I could picture this person very interactive with custody when they're coming in, if he worked in that part of the profession for the medical side. So he goes, the first thing to recognize is that hospitals are more of a retail environment than an industrial environment, in the sense that all sorts of people are milling around. If you worked in a factory, you wouldn't have strangers walking up and down the assembly line. Hospitals are filled with sick elders and children, visitors and nuns, mothers and grandmothers, families and street gangs. Maintaining prisoner security is in an environment like this is no easy trick. And I want to mention something too, just in case people try to utilize the status of an inmate to lessen security, because we definitely want at least 2 officers, and if it's a real heightened transport, a supervisor, got to keep up that balance of safety and security. But I want people to know something. you know, as much as we are there to protect the public from the inmate to make sure they don't escape or they cause someone harm, we're also there to protect the inmate from the outside in case people want to get at them. Like, you could have a sex offender who, you know, the public is like, yeah, we could give two craps about those guys. And when they get out into the hospital, maybe a family member could find out and, you know, go at them, or retaliation from gangs. You know, you can have an informant that's got to go out in the medical. I mean, there's so many reasons that could open up the door for the public wanting to go ahead and get at this individual. So let's be careful. I want people to realize that safety and security is two ways. You're protecting the public, but you're protecting the inmate as well. Would you agree to that, Joe?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and a lot of people think that, you know, when you're doing a correctional transport like that, you know, it's more about the public than it is, you know, the inmate. And that's not the case, because, you know, especially if you're in small urban areas where you're taking one to a hospital, everybody knows everybody, and it doesn't take but a second for somebody to recognize the inmate that you have as they're walking by. And, you know, you're definitely there to protect the inmate as much as you are to protect the public.
Right, and that's the caveat I would add to this, because, again, he, in this article, still a great article, he only expresses the one side, which is, you know, possible escape, whatever it is, more of protecting the public, which I get. But there is the other caveat that I think also helps us justify the need for always having at least two officers, no matter what their status is. You know, you got to protect the inmate. So again, he says if a prisoner had a successful communication to the outside prior to the hospital trip, you can bet this is where he'll try to meet up with family, friends, or other gang members. In fact, hospital visits for arrestees are so routine these days that family, friends, and enemies are likely to follow you to the local hospital anyway, and often do. Tactical awareness has to begin before you even roll up in a hospital parking lot. With that in mind, here are 7 things you can do to survive arguably the most difficult procedure involved in prisoner security, and 100% one of the most difficult procedures. Let's not underestimate how difficult it is to take an inmate in the public and then just be aware of what's happening in an environment that you cannot control. Because remember, in a prison, if the environment gets wacky a little bit, we have the effort to lock it down and go ahead and have some level of control. That is going to be very hard to do in a hospital. Let's just put it that way. Your ability to control the environment in a hospital is not that, I'm not going to say it's not that easy to do. It's just I don't think it can be done. There's just too many variables in play with so many different people that are going to have to come in and see that individual on a professional basis, doctors, nurses. I mean, you know, and you got to let them in. You know, of course, you have your due diligence. You know, you're signing, checking people in and out, but there's just so many things you cannot control, so many variables that, you know, there has to be a way to balance things out. And I think that this article here presents some pretty good measures from once you get to the hospital to hopefully once you able to successfully bring the prisoner back. So let's start first with the visiting your local hospital. Now, guys, by the way, the stuff that he talks about is a team effort. So it's not just, you know, depending on the officers on scene to handle security. There's also a lot of due diligence before the hospitals are even being utilized, you know, where you have safety and security experts coming in, working with the hospital just in case there is a transport, to kind of see what policies and procedures we could put together that really benefit both the hospital and the prison or in the jail, the agency, the Department of Corrections or whatever it is, or county jail. So, or the local police maybe. So you have visit your local hospitals. Your agency needs to establish a pre-planned practiced response to potential incidents in a hospital. Even if you already established some sort of ad hoc routine, don't rest on your laurels and wait for the worst to happen. Instead, augment the plan. Don't worry about being intrusive. Most hospital staff will appreciate your attention to what many view as a problem. Get to know the security department and talk with the director or chief of security. This sort of access is easier in a small town, but with little persistence, it can be done anywhere. Also, talk with the director of the emergency department. Take the nickel tour and get lay of the land, including surgery, MRI, radiology, the psychiatric ward, and even the maternity ward. You never know where you're going to end up with a prisoner. I would like to see if that's being done, Joe. I love your thoughts on this, because I know that, you know, depending on the facility, you do have your partnerships with the local hospitals. And I do believe that you need familiarity with those hospitals, that is not just through the officers that go there on a routine basis, but the sergeant, the lieutenant, the supervisors, but definitely some high-level management should also take a tour, meet the staff, because it's great for high-level management, because this worked out for me to be able to talk to a doctor who's running it, because they'll work with you as well. So sometimes you can have higher-level communication when there's shit happening down below, and let's say there's conflict between medical and let's say the officers, then they can call, let's say, admin, and admin knows the main doctor on the floor and can make a phone call to facilitate whatever concerns we're looking to mitigate. I mean, mostly, when we'll get to it, maybe the removing of cuffs, because that could always be a concern or a conflict. But what's your thoughts of checking out the hospital before it's selected, and who should be involved in understanding the layout of that hospital and getting to know the security staff?
Yeah, I mean, getting to know the layout of your local hospital and having a partnership with not only the hospital but with the security department is a must. You know, for your jail and your sheriff's departments and county jail levels, you know, your jail administrator should be involved, definitely. Just for the fact of having that communication line between them and the emergency room. You know, your medical department on your own facility should have a working relationship with the nurses and the doctors at the you know, your local emergency room or local hospital. You know, as far as the security aspect of it, you know, here most jails and most you know, even the Department of Corrections have working contract and working relationships with the local hospitals that, you know, kind of dictate, you know, what they need to do in the event of. Knowing the physical layout is a must, just, you know, for security purposes, you know, in case, you know, you have one that, you know, is assaultive or, you know, dangerous with a weapon, you know, you don't want them in a room that, you know, like a trauma room that's filled with sharps and everything else in the event of, you know, being able to know the physical layout, you know, your direct routes from, you know, the parking lot to what room you need to get to. You know, our contracts even have it lined out where, you know, we go in through the ambulance bays to eliminate, you know, any public awareness that there's an inmate there. So, you know, having that communication and that team effort between any fashion of security with the hospital, with the, you know, department heads of the emergency room or the hospital themselves and the director of security. You know, it's just a well-run partnership when everybody's involved, you know, because there are aspects that the medical field doesn't think about as far as a correctional setting, because to them it's a routine, something they do every day. We have sharps laying around. We have scalpels and drawers in case we have a trauma and we got to crack a chest or something. And on the correctional side, there are things that the correctional officers don't know about the medical profession that they have to have in place. So, you know, having that contractual awareness with everybody involved is a definite plus.
Yeah, and don't forget, a lot of the decisions are going to have to be made, you know, from higher up anyway. When it comes to, let's say, you know, some needed concern, like even taking off the handcuffs of an individual. Usually the custody on the floor doesn't have the ability to make that decision. That's going to probably be forwarded up to a shift commander or even administration. You know, and then obviously there's going to be some levels of negotiation, and we'll get to that. But that's why it's good for everybody to have an understanding of that hospital, you know, or a good initial understanding, because, you know, if I make this decision, what will be the consequences of my actions? You know, if how secure is this individual? I mean, you know, if we're going to take off handcuffs, what type of room are they in? You know, and how far are they from an exit? Or, you know, it's just very good to have that knowledge. So when you do make a decisions, it's a bit informed. And again, you're also, the more people that have that knowledge, the better. Because again, that's more people that could be a resource in case, you know, I'm not there on site. You know, you could have someone that's like, hey, you know what, Gangi, I go to the hospital all the time. I'll take a trip anyway, just to confirm. But just to let you know, these would be my suggestions. But let me go on site and have an idea of what it is that needs to get done. Because I also think that's good too. I think that if you have more insight on what the layout is and just understanding that facility, you're kind of already going in with a game plan. you know, and if you have to make any adjustments, at least it starts with a good, strong foundation of knowledge of the layout and the safety of security. And then also, obviously, really building a relationship with that security staff, I think really matters. And he's going to say something very on point in this article in a bit about what their priorities are. And we have to understand that. But again, working with them, I think really does help out, because they've helped me when I was an officer work with who they know, like medical doctors or nurses. And, you know, if I thought somebody was a little bit questionable, I can talk to them and they can kind of tell me like, oh, don't worry, that person comes here all the time. Or, hey, you know what, I haven't seen that person. Let me go interact with them and see what that person is doing up here. You know, I've seen that. You know, I've worked with their security, say, hey, listen, this guy keeps on coming back and forth by our room. Do you know who that is? No, but let me go ahead and I'll interact with him real quick, kind of be that layer first and find out what the person's really here for. So I do like this. The first thing he says is call ahead. First reason to call ahead is to prepare assets. If you arrive at a hospital without warning, your chances of getting the most secure room along the safest route with the least amount of public contact are shot. The less time it takes you for you to look for a safe place to park, get directions to a clinic, gain access to employee-only areas, and ultimately get in a good room, the less time your prisoner will have to find cracks in the system and plan an escape. This also means that cohorts will also have less time to intercept you at a hospital for which they are infamous. Before you arrive, and I can't stress this enough, inform both the security and emergency department that you're coming. Remember, in most cases, you are the expert here, not the hospital staff. They will follow your lead. Make your expectations clear, and they will most likely comply. Take the lead and clearly identify your needs. Like, okay, so this is a scenario it gives. Hello, this is Officer Smith from Rockland Detention Facility. I'm arriving with a prisoner at approximately 5:45 p.m. He might have a broken wrist. Please have a security officer meet me with the wheelchair and a blanket outside of the ambulance bay entrance, like Joe mentioned. Control of the transport begins with this call. If you had no prior contact with the hospital, or if the ambulance bay is blocked, full or off limits for law enforcement use, you should also ask and advise the following. What access can I use that's not open to the public? Where is a nearby spot I can park my vehicle? Is there a private room available for immediate use? I'll need a private room as soon as possible. And if you have an isolation room with a private bathroom available, I will need it. One simple call ensures they'll have things ready. Your wait will be shorter, and that than that if you just arrive. You'll have a guide who has keys and code access to virtually anywhere in the hospital. Plus, if the hospital security guard is well trained, you'll have some solid backup. If he isn't, you'll still be better off than if you were alone, provided you direct him or her correctly. But remember that security officers work for the hospital and not you. He or she could be called away to other emergencies. Your prisoner's procedure and moves, in other words, might be partially contingent on their schedule. Joe, I know medical, when they prepare for a medical trip, which always should be a last resort, but again, most of us have infirmaries. We really don't have hospitals, so there's not a higher level of care. So most of the time we have to send them out. But with that said, it's always a last resort. And basically, they're usually the ones that could facilitate the communication with the medical team on the other side. Basically, letting them know, hey, we do have somebody coming in. We're going to get them out there right now. Basically, let's get them admitted directly. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that doesn't. You can send them over there, and all of a sudden, they're put in the waiting room with everybody else. And then I have been known to go to security and say, hey, listen, I'm sorry, man, we can't wait in an open area like this. Well, what do you want? Figure it out. Get us in a room, get us somewhere, because if something happens, I'm going to note right now that I requested to be in a secured room. You can't leave us in the open area of an emergency room. There's just too much traffic coming in. I can't gauge who's who. And then there's just too much eyes on the inmate for their safety. So, what's your thoughts on trying to establish that communication on a tactical level?
Well, I mean, first off, you should always call ahead anyways, just to give them a heads up, because that gives them the chance to go ahead. If they don't have a room available, that gives them a little bit of time to get a room available. Being able to facilitate and communicate your needs depending on, the level of inmate that you have. You definitely don't want to be sitting in a waiting room with the general public for multiple security and safety reasons. um, calling ahead, is not only the right thing to do. It's really the only thing to do, because you're giving them the opportunity to get themselves ready, security wise on their end, and safety wise. Having a room with a bathroom, and everything that's enclosed in the same room is an awesome thing. Does it always happen? No, it doesn't. Depending on how busy the hospital is or how busy the emergency room is. But you still, regardless, you still have to communicate your needs, just for the security and safety aspect of it. A lot of it will depend on the custody of the offender that you have, and what's medically going on with them. That's why it's so crucial to call ahead and not only let the ER department, but security know what you have, what you're going to need. I could say our local hospital here is awesome at that. I'll call ahead and let them know that we're coming, what I have. And the security, one of the security officers there is actually a retired DOC lieutenant as well. And, he'll be outside the ambulance bay waiting on us. So, and that's because of communication.
Yeah. And guys, this is where you also got to use some level of probability versus likelihood, So if the hospital puts you in a position where you feel very vulnerable, we may not have the actual control of just saying, yeah, there's emergency concern here, we're just going to up and go with the inmate. You're not going to have that, unfortunately, because obviously if the person's going through a medical distress, the probability of them, falling, getting worse if they're not treated medically is a lot greater than the likelihood of, or perceived to be a lot greater than the likelihood of something dangerous, someone coming from the outside to try to get at them. Even though, yes, that danger exists, the probability of not getting this person medical right away may weigh a lot greater. So what I tend to do is if I do notice there's concerns where, likelihood is starting to become a probability, I let them know. And then I'm going to document who I spoke to and what the concerns were, just in case something happens. You're going to have some level of documented evidence that says, guys, I spoke to this medical. I said this wasn't a good room. I said that, this is not safe. And unfortunately, they wouldn't work with me. But I know it's not in our total control to just say, yeah, this place isn't safe enough. Hey, we're taking the inmate and we're getting out of here. Yeah, that's probably not going to be able to happen because of the need of medical. But when you feel that there's a chance that something could increase from likelihood to probability, or even before that, you let somebody know, make all efforts to document, exhaust all efforts to let people know, make all efforts to document the actions or inactions of the individuals that are in control to make the environment safer, because again, this is where we don't have that control. And then God forbid if something happens and the agency is getting attacked, there's these efforts that we can fall back on that we documented that said, hey, we got in there, we were not given a secured room, blah, blah, blah. And basically the hospital expected us to do the impossible, and we try to do it best we could. But if you don't document it, they're going to come right back at you, and the hospital will say, well, we didn't know there was a concern. We're not the safety security people. That's their job. That's what they're supposed, and they never told us. So you need to document those interactions. So it says here, find the safest entry point to control, ingress, and access to your prisoners when casing the hospital in your patrol area. In most cases, ambulance bays, like Joe said, are the best points of access, even if you're just transporting your prisoner for a minor medical clearance or psychiatric evaluation. Public access is restricted in ambulance bays, and the route to the emergency department is predetermined. Hospitals probably would prefer you didn't pull your squad into the ambulance bay unless it was necessary for extenuating security or medical reasons. EMTs are required to turn over ambulance quickly to make room for the next arrival. So you don't want to worry about getting back to move your car because you don't have the luxury of leaving your prisoner. Park as close to the ambulance bay as possible and enter on foot with your prisoner. Before we get to kind of like escorting them in, because I guess that's kind of where the transport becomes the escort. Joe mentioned that just to kind of re-clarify that. Joe, so you're not parking in the bay, but you're parking as close as possible. You already let security know you're en route there. So hopefully they did what they had to do to secure the environment, but you do have that predetermined entrance. Like for me, when you park in the ambulance bay, it gets you into that emergency room super quick, which then opens up areas for hopefully a private room somewhere off to the side where you can be discreet. But Joe, is any area that you want to revisit before we go to the wheeling them in?
Yeah, I mean, most of your hospitals already have pre-designated parking spots close to the ambulance bay doors for law enforcement or for Department of Corrections. You definitely don't want to jam up the ER bay, parking area there in case there's a true emergency that comes in. But most of your hospitals generally have spots already pre-designated and marked for law enforcement and that are generally very close to the ambulance bay doors anyway. So, your direct route is your direct route, and the shortest route and most private route is always going to be the best way to go.
Yeah, now this is a few paragraphs, but let me read this real quick because this does matter. This one brings them in, and there may be some controversy here, which I would like to discuss about handcuffing someone to a fixed object. Some states don't allow it. When I say fixed objects, I always look at fixed as something stationary that cannot be moved in the room. So for me, a wheelchair and a movable bed to me doesn't mean it's a fixed object, because in case of emergency, I could still move the bed. I could still wheel the chair, but unfortunately, some people lump that up as it all is the same. I believe fixed object really should be defined as something in the room that cannot be moved. But I've seen people say, well, you can't handcuff the person to the bed. It's like, yeah, well, the bed is movable. Nope, you can't. It's a fixed object. Okay, well, so you got to figure that out, because that's going to be specific to your state. But this part right here may be something that may vary from state to state. But I do think if this is allowed, this is definitely the highest level of practice. I love this right here. So it goes, once you arrive at the door, you'll also want to have security officer waiting for you, which we mentioned, with the wheelchair and a blanket. Presumably your subject is ambulatory, or you would have called an ambulance to the scene. However, and that's a good point too, guys. We're talking about a transport where we're dropping the inmate off, not an ambulance. This is a little bit different. It's not a 911. It's just us taking someone to the hospital. So that we're doing the transport, not the medical, because that'll be a whole different ball game if it's the ambulance taking them in. So I'm glad he mentioned that. However, the purpose of the wheelchair is primarily for security. Transporting patients through hospitals in wheelchairs is not only acceptable, but frequently preferred, so it suits all parties involved. Place your prisoner in the wheelchair, restrain the prisoner directly to the chair, which we'll discuss shortly, making sure the prisoner does not have a free hand. Make sure you have a second set of cuffs or chains to secure him to the seat frame of the chair, not to a removable part of the chair. If you are not careful, you end up dodging a loose wheelchair armrest. Use leg shackles to impede movement as well. Remember, your prisoner will be in direct contact with the public, and you are responsible for everyone's safety, not just the hospital. There are other methods for restraining patients in a wheelchair that involve the use of a back strap, chains, etc. Either way, the idea is to add another level of security. If your prisoner wants to run out the door and down the street, he'll have to do it chained to a wheelchair or gurney. Once the prisoner is in the chair, cover him with the blanket to conceal the restraints. This is a win-win practice. When the public and curious children aren't drawn to the sight of a handcuffed and shackled prisoner, you win. And when hospital staff members don't see them in the open, you win. I've heard, and that's true, and we'll get to that, but that's true. Hospitals are very uncomfortable with bringing in shackled individuals, whether it's for vanity or whatever it is, but it really does stir up a lot of concerns from the other people that are there that probably put pressure on the hospital to, kind of, wait, what's going on? Who's this person? Blah, blah, blah. So they don't like that, at least from a vanity perspective, but I'm sure, it's just also the pressure of people just asking questions. I've heard all sides of the argument regarding this suggestion. I've heard officers say there's a benefit to the public, humiliation caused by being seen in police restraints. They also argue that they like to see where even a cuffed prisoner's hands are. I've also seen doctors and hospital administrators become infuriated by the sight of handcuffs and shackles. And make no mistake, some doctors and nurses automatically make it their business to say and do anything they can to get you to take them off. I've also seen patients and visitors who are frightened by the sight of shackled prisoners in public hallways and waiting areas, refusing to practice reasonable discretion with regard to restrain forensic patients in plain view is indefensible in the eyes of the public and hospital personnel. Your goal should always also be to keep your prisoner calm and controlled, so it's also tactically smart. Now, minimizing a prisoner's embarrassment thereby maintaining his dignity is tactically smart. It will go a long way to helping you remain in control. If you've done a thorough search and keep your eyes on him at all times, covering the inmate's restraints shouldn't pose a problem. Remember, when moving the prisoner through the facility, you should be the one pushing the wheelchair, not the security officer or medical staff. This puts you in the best possible control position should your subject attempt anything. Ask the security officer to walk ahead of you. His job will be to get you through coded and locked doors and to keep bystanders away. The security officer will also be in a good cover position should things go south. If you transported your subject by ambulance, then you need to secure them in the gurney. Use shackles to stabilize their feet and attach those to the gurney. You may have to use a strap or extra set of cuffs to get this accomplished. And as for forensic patients have seriously injured and killed officers by kicking them from the gurney, assist in moving the gurney from the front and have the security officer walk a few feet ahead. I mean, this guy really is very detailed. But what's your thoughts? Let's start with the wheelchair. I mean, Joe, I've done it. I've covered the cuffs, obviously. I mean, yes, if I know that the cuffs are on, they're double locked, they're as secure as can be. I mean, granted, if they're going to maneuver around it, I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, I'm not saying it's not impossible, but I'm not saying it's not possible. But I don't want to put the odds in that person's favor. So yeah, make sure it's secure. Definitely make sure the double locks are there. And then I get the covering for dignity. And, also you don't want people coming up to you like, hey, what the hell is up with that individual? Why they handcuffed them? Even though they see the uniform, I think covering them up does present a little, what is it? More of like a self-esteem thing for the inmate?
I think it's more along the lines of a shock factor for the public. You see somebody come in full restraints, and most of the public is, oh my God, we got a serial killer in here. You see him in handcuffs and a belly belt and leg restraints. You're thinking, oh shit, we got the Green Mile here.
You made a good point, Joe. I don't think because we should have universal procedures no matter what the level of status is, because even if it's a full min, they're still going to a lower level status when they go out to the community.
Absolutely.
So it still requires higher level of security. Anytime you have a higher level going to a lower level, it does require a higher level of security. So you're right. It could be someone who's in for something simple, but in their mind, it's a serial killer.
Yeah, because every inmate that we take to the county jail is fully shackled, regardless if he's drunk in public, DWI, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They're all shackled the same. And as far as bringing them in a wheelchair, generally here it's not that big of a problem because it's probably about 20 steps from the car to the ER bay. So. The fixed object thing, definite no here. They call it unlawful restraint. You cannot affix somebody to a fixed object, regardless if it's a gurney, wheelchair. The only thing that we have here is the restraint chair itself that we can put somebody in. But, as far as, fixing them to a fixed object, that's something we cannot do here in this state.
Now, right. So now remember, this article was written in 2009. So some of these changes did happen with the fixed object. But I do know that there's some, because I kind of posted this out there, there are some facilities that still use this procedure for safety. Because I do like the wheelchair. I do like it, whether they're restrained or not. I do like pushing them in with the wheelchair. I think there is some level of control, because the person starts to get up or not do as I told you can you know what I'm saying.
You can grab them and send them back down, absolutely. But
because I do think I'll give an example and we'll get to it later. If by chance medical makes the request to remove the handcuffs or maybe try some softer level of restraint, like a twisty tie, twisty tie, Jesus Christ.
Twisty tie.
Sorry, I got kids. I'm thinking about always putting the bread on.
The flex cuffs.
The flex cuffs. Yeah, holy crap. The twisty ties. So I got kids, guys. They're always fucking doing the bread and then throwing out the twisty tie. But I've seen it where if they got to get to something and it is needed medically, there could be a request that's put up through let's say the shift commander through admin, and they'll say, okay, listen, at this point, I still want the person restrained, so leave the one hand available, but put the other hand on the bed. But they'll ask, can the bed be moved? Yes, it's not a stationary bed. Okay, then I'm comfortable at this point because we got to get to them medically, but I also want to balance the safety for the officers. So, and I got an officer there in case something happens, but one of the things we'll ask is, because the bed's a heavy thing, but can it still be moved if something happens? Yes. But again, it may not be something that you're doing automatically, but it could be something that could be needed to supplement safety and security. So that's kind of what the controversy of what this dialogue, I knew when we got to this point, there's the high no, but then there also could be a justification. Like if I had an inmate that had to go to the hospital and they had histories of always escaping, that now you have the female that we did in the video before, I'm probably going to want to take those extra measures with the wheelchair if allowed, if permitted. Because again, shame on you the first time, shame on me the second time. I think that kind of falls into that, but that's if the state will allow that. But I think if you can get a higher level approval and say, hey, listen, this person just escaped last time from medical, but now they're having another medical emergency. Medical wants to send them out, which again should be a last resort, but they want to send them out. I would like to take extra precaution this time. I would like to, wheel them in, maybe secure them in the wheelchairs. Once they get into the bed area, find, maybe I like that gurney, because remember, you have medical restraints. So maybe you could work with the security on the medical side to see if they're willing to help us supplement in case anything has to be removed and added on. But so Joe, so you're saying that's a definite no, but if needed or if justified, I think if the object can move, I'm not saying that your go-to, but if you have to do it, the first thing I would ask is, okay, I get the concern, but as I said, can the bed be moved? Is that a concern? Can we move the bed? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly understand both aspects of it. I mean, I've never seen an inmate escape from a free world hospital by jumping out of the second story window with a gurney attached to him. If I have, I've been sleeping a minute. But the other aspect of that too is it's a life and safety code. Down here it is, regardless of the situation, it's a no. The only other time that it would not be a no is if it was doctor ordered soft restraints due to an inmate being combative, unbeknownst to himself because of a medical condition, brain injury, or, something of that nature, where, he has to be physically restrained to the bed due to medical necessity, not because of security necessity. And
that's the conflict.
Yeah, and it sucks because it puts you in a conundrum of what the hell do I do? But ultimately, doctor ordered medical necessity doesn't necessarily negate security, but you can't stand in the way of a medical necessity, especially if it's a life-saving issue or something they have to do in order to extend his life. But the fixed object thing, I honestly understand both sides and both aspects of it. And that's the reason why some states still use it and why some states still don't.
Well, I've been on the floor myself. I haven't taken some high profile. Again, you're also weighing out probability versus likelihood, of course. We talked about that. Now, I've had some high profile inmates that I've taken out as an officer, or even as a sergeant following up. And, once the request comes from medical, and we'll get to that, we do ask for alternatives. And if they fail to provide one, but we still have to medically, like, let's say, unshackle them. So again, they're not shackled to a fixed object. They're just restrained. I will make the request that say at this point, I just don't feel good with unshackling this inmate. So if there's any way we could control and maybe shackle until the medical procedure, whatever has got to be done, and then we can go ahead and, take them off the bed or whatever it is and shackle them, take the handcuffs off the bed and then shackle them back. Because again, I think that's where you have that concern where there's going to be a safety component for staff. And that's where it has to be the balance because, some inmates, man, once you go to unshackle them, they're no longer sick and they're ready to take off or hurt somebody, and you will be responsible for it, So I think, again, there should always be that exhausted, effort where even if it's not allowed, it at least should be asked. You know, tell me no.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so tell me no. So if shit hits the fan, I could basically say, hey, these were the attempts I tried in which I got shut down on. But I know this may sound crazy, but and I know the law may change since the article was written. But if you do have an individual that keeps on escaping from the hospital, you can't keep bringing them in the same way. You know, you got to elevate your practices, you know. So if this is the case, I'm not saying whatever, just in general, and then maybe if that requires that heightened level of security where they're kind of secured into a wheelchair only because of their past history. You know, I mean, we may not be doing that for everyone, but we got to do it for this one. So again, you know, you have the extreme, but people have also put themselves in that position. Why are you putting me restrained in the chair? I didn't do that technically. But last time we brought you out, you escaped and you did it to yourself. So now this time around, you know, we're not going to fall for it. But you're right. I mean, you know, is it going to be allowed? Maybe sometimes it should be a case by case basis, because if that person jumps ships again, you know, the media is going to quickly up and they jump shit again. It's like, yeah, but we, you know, you don't know what we can and can't do. So the person's able to escape again because we can't heighten that security.
The one good thing in Texas is the fact that our Department of Corrections actually has their own hospital. They actually have their own hospital. It's run by a warden. It's run by a major. It's run by correctional officers. You know, so if it's something routine, non-emergent that we can send them there, that's ultimately what we'll do first. Now we do have contracts, you know, up in Huntsville, where Huntsville Memorial Hospital, they actually have a contract where they have their own wing up there in a public facility and a security unit that's run by correctional officers and not by hospital security. So you know, we have a few options at our disposal, you know, but regardless of the county or the you know, the city jail level, you're still dependent on that local hospital.
Yeah, like we have that too. You know, we have a hospital and the rest are all infirmaries. And then we have a centralized public hospital that we have a floor. And then, some of it could be planned. So if it's planned, you know, unless the specialty has to be at this one hospital because this hospital doesn't offer it, usually send them to the controlled facility or the hospital. But we're right. But when it's emergent, then the problem is you have to have those contracts, or you have to have a connection with the hospitals that are immediate to your facility because, you know, of the time. You know, you got to get that person there immediately. So that's a good. That's a good point.
What really sucks is, you know, in the case of this last escape with that female that, you know, from Travis County, you know, regardless of what practices you have in place, when it happens, it's the correctional officer who's going to take the heat for it. You know, you got the bystander out there filming her chasing this convict down, you know, and it sucks because no matter what kind of contractual obligations you got with the local hospitals, at the end of the day, they're still your responsibility, regardless of what happens.
Right. Now, this is interesting. So basically to maintain custody, kind of, again, times have changed since 2009, but this is definitely worth something to revisit if we became a little bit more lenient on this side. Recently, there were 4 escapes on mine, just articles 2009. Escape attempts from one public hospital in a single week. Sad to say, we probably have more right now. One attempt was successful. One required the partial evacuation of the emergency department for most of an hour. One ended with an injury to a nurse, and another almost ended a correctional officer's career. 3 of the 4 escapees were completely unrestrained, none for a bona fide medical reason. That's probably when people defined it by status. Oh, they're minimal. Don't worry about it. No. They're going to a lower level of security. Yes, community is a lower level of security, so we have to hire the restraint. 2 were unnecessarily unrestrained for a routine examination. So again, that's funny because that's when the doctor makes the request, but it's really not needed. And that's when custody should come back and say, well, can you explain medically why this may be needed for you to do what you got to do? Because at that point here, if it's not needed, I am going to recommend either softer restraint or we don't. But if you're going to do it again, and they'll get to that. But right here, it said wasn't needed. That means that if the person was escaped out of their handcuffs or whatever, I'm sorry, the medical made the request to get them out of their handcuffs, and you look back and someone, well, why did you have to take the handcuffs off anyway when you were only working on his foot? You know, did it make any sense? Whatever the case is. And that's when, you know, medical will have to answer for that. But that's when they could also come on custody and say, hey, you didn't challenge this? Because custody is always going to, someone's always going to look at them. You know, regardless if the medical made the wrong call, safety and security is the final filter. So even if the doctor said, you know, oh, well, yeah, I did say it was medical, someone will still go at custody and say, well, wait a second. You didn't unchallenge this. You didn't say no to it, or you didn't try to, you know, do anything to negate this request from the doctor. One was left loosely applied to a leg shackle. One was left in loosely applied leg shackles, which they slipped out as soon as the CO took them to the bathroom break, which they get to here about bathrooms. 2 of the 4 escape attempts were connected to unsupervised toileting, and all were the result of presumed compliance and careless practice. None of these escape attempts made headlines for a few reasons. They weren't successful. The CO wasn't fired, and no one was seriously injured or killed. But a more telling reason they weren't newsworthy is because escape attempts are becoming routine in hospitals and ERs. I don't think that's changed much. Most of these escapes fail, though usually not without significant embarrassment or injury to corrections and police officers. All right, so let's get to this next part. We're doing the 7 tips. Don't presume compliance. Don't let presumed compliance be your downfall in a clinical environment. Nurses and doctors have assured me that people can convincingly fake just about anything enough to fool many first responders in the field. And we talked about that, even heart conditions. And trust me, working in corrections, that seems to be faked all the time. So if a nurse, doctor, x-ray technician, or other allied health professional asks you to remove restraints, you need to ask why. That's what we just discussed. So it's good that we're ahead of that. Even if a medical professional makes the decision to remove the restraints, you could still end up with the lion's share of the liability should someone get hurt. It's pretty cool how what we just said leaned into what he just said. That's cool. Now, I love this. Note the difference here. Law enforcement restraints are administrative restraints intended to maintain legal custody, as opposed to hospital restraints, which are behavior stabilization equipment, sort of what Joe touched on. And Joe, we're going to be visiting. Let me just finish this section. I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because that's what you touched on. But I want to note the difference there, and maybe Joe could explain it. I'll say it again just to get it out there, because I think this is important. Law enforcement restraints are administrative restraints intended to maintain legal custody, as opposed to hospital restraints, which are behavior stabilization equipment. All right, when asked to remove restraints, ask first if there's an alternative to removing them. If they reply that there is none, advise them that the reason for removing the restraints has to be documented in your report. So you'll need their name, the reason why the prisoner had to be on restraint, and why there was no alternative. Then request that they document those reasons in the patient's chart. Alternatives tend to magically appear when people are asked to share in any possible consequences for second-guessing a correctional police officer or police officer in general. Sometimes handcuffs, belly chains, and shackles really do have to come off, let's say for MRI, imaging procedures, x-rays at the restraint site, or other procedures that may genuinely be incompatible with standard police restraints. Since you can't just take them off and hope for the best, you'll have to find an alternative. Hospitals with professional security and or psychiatric custodial staff have special training and equipment to use for restraining patients. If you're working alone, which you shouldn't be, but you notice you got to put that caveat in because it happens. It could be policy and procedure depending on the status of the inmate. If you're working alone, ask for a security officer to assist you during the procedure. Station yourself between the door and the patient. If it's an x-ray procedure, put on a lead apron, ask where it's safe to stand, and place the security officer in a cover position outside the door. Keep your eyes on your prisoner at all times. And guys, before we go on that's why you're supposed to have one in the room and one outside the room. And the one in the room shouldn't really have any weapons. The one outside the room should be the backup holding things. But I like how he said it. If you're by yourself, the security officer takes guard. But that's why you shouldn't be by yourself, because you can't tell the security officer to do that. You know, you're not their boss, technically. So if you know right there that position is needed, just for that alone, I mean, outside of every other reason that they're needed, who am I technically as a correctional officer now tell that, hey, do me a favor, I'm here, go stand out that door. No, I need my partner. And, hey, guys, this guy's going for MRI. How am I supposed to, be vigilant of him inside the room and then know what's going on outside? And also, that's the other component. If you're in the regular room, it's like, well, what do? I stand on the outside or do I stand on the inside? If I stand on the inside, I can't see what's going on the outside. And if I stand on the outside, I can't see what's going on the inside. I don't understand policies that no matter what that they have one officer there. I never got that. Because I'll tell you something, if I was doing my rounds and I saw either both officers in the room or both officers out of the room, someone's getting written up. Because you have two concerns, the inmate in the room and what's outside. So when they start doing medical procedures or things that require some level of what's it called? Privacy. Now you got two separate rooms now. So now that I'm closing the curtain, which technically probably would be closed the whole time because I have an inmate, as I said, if I'm not in a private room, who's watching the outside? Even in a private room, it's still good to have someone watching the outside. And who's watching the inside? So it's like, we only need one officer because the inmate is lowest restriction. I don't care because the environment, it doesn't care what our rules are. Doesn't care what restriction the inmate's on. And if you're in clinic and again, we also remember two things, protecting the public, protecting the inmate. And that, protecting if nothing's 100%, but maybe we could think of it this way. I just thought of it just now. Protecting the public is the officer on the inside. Protecting the inmate is the officer on the outside. In general, very general, but I think that makes sense. Let me be the scout. Make sure, nothing's happening. Obviously, you could have people that are there to assist the inmate. I get it. But having said that, for the most part, I think we kind of run dry on all the reasons you need to have those two officers present. So please, if someone's watching this video, at least take note of what we just said. Outside, inside. That alone defines the need for two. And if you're in a clinic or hospital, that's something I just don't understand. If you're in a clinic or hospital without dedicated security and or behavioral restraint equipment, so there's the caveat on that. You may not always have security. You'll need to request another officer from your own department to assist you. It should be automatic, but at least he's covering his bases. But it should be automatic. But managing unrestrained prisoners in a public clinical environment is inherently dangerous. Manage them alone is just plain reckless. All right, Joe, there's a lot there. That I really want to touch base on.
There's a lot there, but the first thing that jumps out of my mind is the one thing that the general public needs to keep in mind is, generally if you're a police officer, you're always going to be by yourself when you're bringing one to a hospital because you probably just made the arrest and you're bringing them in for medical clearance, so you're always going to be by yourself unless you're at you work with the hospital security. Same thing with a sheriff's deputy. 9 times out of 10, when they bring an arrestee to the hospital, they're by themselves. The only time in Texas I've seen where, you've had, 2 or more is, actual state level Department of Corrections, where you're always going to have 2 officers. One's going to be outside the room with a weapon. One's going to be inside the room monitoring the offender. That's why, the biggest thing is for me was flex cuffs, making sure that we have flex cuffs with every transport when I, was a lieutenant with the Department of Corrections, because I already knew that there was a chance that this inmate was going to have to go through X-ray. He was going to have to go through MRI, which you can't do in restraints, which is understandable. But that inmate was going to be restrained at some level. If not mechanically with hand restraints, he was going to be restrained with flex cuffs, which you can do, MRIs and X-rays with, just to alleviate any possibility or chance to an escape. Public surroundings and security awareness is always something that you're going to have to be visual about. If you're in a Department of Corrections setting, you're always going to have the one officer inside the room, regardless of what they're performing. If it's surgery, if it's an MRI, if it's an X-ray, you're always going to have that one officer in the room in the Department of Corrections setting, and you're always going to have that one officer outside the room in that Department of Corrections setting. For a police officer or a sheriff's deputy, it's not so much. It's basically you and that hospital security officer. You know, and I can honestly say here, I'm blessed because our security officers, half of them are retired Department of Corrections employees. So they know, you know, they know what security aspects are. They know their job from a hospital standpoint, from a public safety standpoint, but they also know from the inmate standpoint. So, you know, being able to work well with them together is definitely, it's not a basic necessity. It's a definite necessity.
Yeah, and I think, like, for here, the reason why you need the two officers, in my opinion, two correctional officers or two deputies, is because you can't maintain 100% of vigilance on the inmate and the environment. You just can't. There's got to be a partnership, a shared effort. And as I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of doing, let's say, a search on a dorm, and I'm one officer, and I'm walking around. They're telling me, okay, guys, you got to go search 3 bed areas. It's like, okay, well, it's hard for me to search the bed area effectively when I got the inmates walking all around me. I need someone to kind of look at the inmates so I can fully focus on my search, because those require 100% effort. If I'm not fully focused on my search, I'm going to miss things because I'm more worried about the inmate who presents the bigger threat. You know, these are things that require 100% vigilance and attention. It really can't be split at any moment because one could easily distract the other. So when you don't have that balance, you know, instead of having 2 things running at 100%, you got one thing, if you're lucky, to run at 50%. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. And I know there's a lot of facilities that are understaffed. I get it. But these are one of those areas where you got to find a way to get someone out there, you know, a partner with that individual. Because again, you know, if shit hits the fan, you know, how do you expect that one officer, one, to maintain vigilance of both the inside and the outside, you know, so the inmate and the outer room, but then also, how do you expect that officer to go in there and be dependent on that security officer? You know, I get it, they're there, and I get it, but to that level, I don't know, to that level where it's more about, you know, focusing on the safety of the inmate, the safety of the public. I want another trained professional with me that I know, that I can work with, and I know they're out there doing this, and I'm in here doing this, and, you know, kind of keep that balance. But, you know, again, for some facilities that define it by status, rethink it, because, you know, the community is the lowest level of restriction, which is still lower level than min. Min is not the last stop, guys. Remember that. A full min inmate is not the last stop. You still have community release, if you will, or where they go to the community, but technically they're still under us. That, you know, technically starts to push it to that last stop. So again, guys, the moment that person goes from higher level to lower level, so yes, full min to community, you gotta up those levels of restraints. And if the person also poses a greater risk, then you bring it to that extreme. So you kind of have those steps, and then they could be justified, because what's going to wind up happening is if you do get fooled and they wind up escaping again, or just, you're going to get held accountable for measures that people look back on and say, well, you could have taken, you know, or, you know, well, guess what? I did take them, but nobody approved it. So here's my documentation. So it alleviates you, it alleviates the agency, and then it just, you know, puts it back on the people that weren't doing their job. And by the way, even when asking the questions, you're not posing resistance. You're building information to make an informed decision that you can then relay to whoever you got to relay it up to for the final approval. Because I'll tell you something right now, if you give me a phone call that says, hey, such and such handcuffs got to be removed, or whatever it is, and you are not giving me the information I need to make a valid decision, I'm going to say no anyway. You know, that's why there's got to be those buffers. That's why I don't think it's meant for the officer on the floor immediately to make that decision to unrestrain them. That definitely has got to be passed up at all levels, so everybody makes that decision through the most informed means possible, which means that officer on the floor starts the information. And don't forget, we have knowledge because we visited the facility, but still that in the moment, I'm leaning on what that officer has to tell me, and then we make a decision together. But even if I make the decision as a as let's say admin, if I can get a supervisor on site, if it's not emergent, I want them to take a look at it to see what we got going on. But again, it's going to be that last resort, because the first thing I'm going to say back is, hey, is there any alternative measures to, if we're going to unrestrain them, to maybe use the cuffs, the flex cuffs or something, or does the bed move? Because this level of inmate right now is a maximum security inmate. When I move them around in a prison, they're secured. So do you want me to move them around a fucking community unsecured? I actually have more security being utilized in a more secured environment than you're asking me to do right now. So we better cross all T's and dot all I's before I even think about removing one piece of that restraint. So then they have the forensic isolation, which is cool. I've leaned on this because every hospital or most hospitals should have this. The concept of forensic isolation is something healthcare providers can understand and appreciate. Law enforcement officers can get behind it too. If there's one point of common ground, this is it. If law enforcement officers had their way, there would be a sally port next to every ambulance bay and a row of cells in every emergency room, but that's not very realistic. Some hospitals do have forensic rooms for prisoner patients, and that's a good thing. Other hospitals have with dedicated psychiatric patients care may have emergency seclusion facilities, but even this is a pretty progressive idea. Most of them are glorified broom closets with restraint beds and padded walls that are not dedicated to emergency medical care. On the whole, hospitals tend to resist the extra costs associated with forensic emergency medical facilities. When I was always told to tour a hospital to kind of see from a higher level if it's practical or not. Now, granted, those decisions could also be made above me, but it's still good for me to know. So I have some familiarity with the layout. That's one of the things we're told to look for, to see if they have a forensic room that could be utilized when we bring a patient in, bring an inmate in. So that's good to know if you're looking or scouting the area. So this is for the author. I've been involved in conversations about this subject between law enforcement officials and hospital administrators, and in both cases, they've reached the same impasse. The hospital feels that it's required to treat society's prisoners, and it's the responsibility of police agencies and corrections departments to keep everyone else safe while forensic patients are in their midst. The upshot is that if county, state, or federal funds will foot the bill, hospitals will build all the forensic facility corrections and police officers want. So that's sort of what Joe said and I said. Sometimes you also have hospitals that have a dedicated floor for inmates. So that definitely is something that the state is flipping the bill on 100%. The security, the safety and security, the custody, the confined rooms. But if by chance there is a hospital that, like for an immediate need is connected to your facility in case there's a 911, it doesn't hurt for the state or the jail to maybe work with the hospital and put some funding up for a secure room that's dedicated to them. So when they come in, they know they have that room available. And again, I think the hospital would kind of see the benefit of that if they're not flipping the bill. So I don't know how much a room like that would cost, but it could be worthy of an investment if this is going to be a long partnership with that local hospital in that area. So that's something that's definitely a great idea from Joel Ashley. So I'm going to finish this up, Joe. I'd love to get your thoughts. Let me just see how much is. All right, so this one's a longer one. So let's finish this up. Hold on. Inside many hospital emergency rooms are isolation rooms designed to contain infection. A true isolation room has a negative pressure system to prevent contaminated air from being released into the general patient population. Good ones have also a separate entrance like an airlock, so care providers and visitors can wash and gown up without contaminating the common areas outside the room. Cadillac emergency department isolation rooms even have a private bathroom. Typical emergency examination and procedure rooms have shared bathrooms for patients located in common areas. That's a concern, and we'll get to that. But that's true. I've seen that when you're in the emergency room, the one bathroom. So, Joe, there's a couple of things you're going to have to. I'm going to want you to revisit because that's something I want you to revisit. And also, real quick before I finish that, Joe, did you mention that thought about the difference between restraining for our side and the medical side? Like one is for behavior stabilization and one is for technically legal accountability. I wanted to get your quick thought on that. What's your thought about that different separation?
Well, yeah, I mean, initially when you bring them in, it's for legal ramifications because they are in custody. But once you get them there, if for some reason medical necessity dictates they have to be in soft restraints, because if he's a suicidal subject, if he's a subject that's had some sort of traumatic brain injury, maybe a DWI from in a serious car wreck, and he's a danger to himself and combative to others, unbeknownst to him, then yeah, absolutely.
Right. And then, so before we get to those let me just finish this last part. Then I want to talk about that idea for the isolated rooms. Violence in healthcare settings is on the rise. So if there's one concept law enforcement officers need healthcare providers to accept, is that their job is inherently dangerous. Healthcare providers are 4 or 5 times more likely than traditional workers to be victim of workplace violence. The risk rises precipitously. You know what I mean? It increases. For workers in emergency medicine, behavioral health, or critical care, staff here is vulnerable to assault by a patient or family member. Healthcare providers are drilled with infection control principles, but it's looking more and more like they're at greater risk for serious injury or death from violence than from an errant needle stick. It's time to start treating violence as a healthcare issue, not just for patients, but providers. That's good to know. So if you're medical side, that's a very good fact. And I don't, again, this is 2009, but I can clearly tell you that's still happening today, especially if you're dealing with that person directly and the impulse comes to that inmate's way, you're going to be the first person. How many times do you see on an attempted escape, the medical professional is the one that's taken hostage, or to attempt to take the person hostage? Given the absence of forensic isolation rooms, what can we do to isolate patient prisoners? Obviously, we want them out of public contact ASAP, just like a kid with chickenpox get bumped to the front of the line in a waiting room full of kids with tummy aches and rashes. Forensic patients and patients otherwise at risk for violence need to be given triage priority. Ask that emergency staff get your prisoner to a room as soon as possible, which we talked about. Explain that's for safety, explains that for their safety. I like that, though. Hey, let's get them in a room right now privately, because again, for your safety, it would be better if we were able to control the environment a little bit more by putting them in a more secured room. They don't need to know any more than that, and it will certainly get their attention. Use your tactical communication and a good tactical 8 steps. This is what he says. Hello, I'm going to use Joe's name on this one. I'm Officer Joe Pomponio with the Rockland Detention Facility. I'm bringing this prisoner in to be medically cleared for the jail. He's complaining about pain in his side. I need to keep him out of the waiting area. For everyone's safety, I need to secure him on a gurney inside the room, preferably an isolation room. So I know he said secured the gurney. We could revisit that, but I understand why it's said. We'll wait off to the side here until you get us into the next room. Thank you. You notice that they're not asking. They're telling. I need this room. We'll wait off into the side until you get us a room. The typical emergency department exam room is the last place you'd want to get into a fight. Equipment is sticking out from the walls everywhere. The room is filled with glass, sharp objects, biohazard, poison needles, flammable liquid, and all sorts of weapons of opportunity from wheelchairs and IV pole parts that make great improvised weapons. And these people know how to make those weapons. The real power that correctional officers have in these situations is to lead with authority in the institutional setting by making your expectations reasonable, legal, and most of all, clear. If you emphasize the importance of these safety procedures, it will give them credibility in their eyes. So, Joe, I gotta discuss this real quick. I'm wrapping it down. There's 2 other parts left. One's included supervised toileting, which we haven't discussed because that's a big concern with escapes. Is the inmate going out of sight to use the bathroom and unfortunately manipulating their cuffs or whatever it is. They may not even have cuffs when they go to their bathroom. But Joe, seclusion rooms. But I also like the fact that as an officer, when you're calling on site, this is what I need, and we'll wait till I get it. What's your thoughts on this part of safety and security, getting that separate room and also expressing your expectations from the medical department when taking them on a trip, the prisoner on the trip?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the level of the inmate that you have, it's definitely a must that you make your needs and wants clear to them, as professionally as you can. It may not always happen right off the bat. There's been times where, I've stayed in my secured transport vehicle with an inmate until a room became available, but they knew I was there. So, making sure you call ahead and communicating your needs and wants and all centered around this offender, that's definitely a necessity. You may not always get an isolation room right off the bat, especially zero pressure rooms, because, you may have somebody with a communicable disease there that needs that room. So you have to think about the alternatives while you're in a hospital setting as a correctional officer.
Yeah, and guys, want to add this little tip real quick. Just it's not in this article here, but just a side note, just a little sidebar tip before we do the last 2 tips. Avoid complacency, we talked about, and also try not to, or don't use OC in a hospital. It clogs up the airwaves, and you could wind up getting elderly or infants or something like that where they can't breathe, and that puts us at a greater liability because now you used OC, and you're pretty much told rule number 1: don't use OC in a hospital setting. And guys, they did a recent thing about people getting out of cuffs, and of course they had this former inmate on who basically said it's officer complacency, and that's like the first thing they focused on. And I'm not saying that he's lying or not, but there's also other things. I mean, yes. I mean, yeah. Are we double locking the cuffs? Are we vigilant when they're playing, when they're trying to play with the cuffs? I mean, yes, complacency could be a factor, but it's not always a factor. I have seen an example here, females, and probably men too, but I've definitely seen females could dislocate their thumb and pull their hands right out of the handcuffs. I found some females are very hard to handcuff because the wrists are so small and they could just manipulate out of the cuffs. So sometimes we just use flexi cuffs. I just want people to know that not everything is based on complacency. It's usually based on, either planned or impulsive, but more of the will of that inmate to find a way to escape. Let's not negate that. Yeah, even if you had an officer complacent, sad to say, they should be doing better, but let's not minimize the will of that inmate to find a way to get out and run, because sometimes they could be very inventive. I mean, we could never even do a show of all the possible ways someone could plan an escape because they're inventive, they're innovative. This is important part, supervised toileting. This happens a lot where the inmate has to use the bathroom. And then, are we going to go in the bathroom with them, regardless of what they're doing? Or are we waiting outside? So here we go. The one subject no one wants to deal with. And this is where it tends to be a big vulnerability with our practices, because some policies may not even have an area in the policy where the inmate has to go to the toilet. What do? Some do, some may not, because they may assume it as the generalized catch-all. But I think there should be a separate part of the policy that covers supervised toileting. But basically, here we go. The one subject no one wants to deal with, talk about, or even think about. But we have to think about it because toileting is the point at which many of these escapes occur. In the prisoner's mind, here's how it should play out. Fake the right symptom, get inside a hospital ER, tell them I have to defecate. Remember, that's, take a shit. To get privacy, get uncuffed, and escaped. Now that we said it out loud, there should be no question, just like, I don't know what that means, just like IAMO, I don't know what that means. Maybe intent or motive. He's got this thing where he goes, okay, just like IAMO, remove one of these things. So I is intent, A is ability, M is motive, and O is opportunity. If you remove one of them, no escape can be attempted. I like that. So if you remove the attempt, the intent, the ability, the motive, or the opportunity, the only way your prisoner can escape is if they fool you into helping them. They need your cooperation. It's up to you if you want to give it to them. A prisoner in restraints loses their right to privacy when safety is at issue. If that weren't the case, then jail cells would have hospital curtains. Do your part to end rampant prisoner escape and stop sending prisoners unsupervised and unrestrained into a public bathroom. Some doctors have tried to deny bathroom use to forensic patients as a way of dealing with the problem, but this can land you, the doctor, and the hospital to court, especially if the prisoner is forced to soil himself. So don't get caught up in that trick bag. If your prisoner needs to use the bathroom, you have a few good options, none of which include unrestraining the prisoner or leaving the patient. I don't know what this part is. Our prisoner or leaving patients are assigned to isolation rooms for chickenpox, tuberculosis, measles, and other high contagious disease alone. That should have been edited more. But basically, he's basically saying here, there's all good options, and none of those options deal with unrestraining an inmate or leaving them alone. If the patient needs to urinate, leave them in restraints and ask for nursing assistance. Determine the risk to the nursing staff. If acceptable, ask them to attempt using a urinal with the patient while they are restrained to the gurney. Keep eyes at all times so the nursing staff doesn't make tactical errors like exposing themselves to possible headbutts, bites, grabs, or kicks. If the patient needs to have a bowel movement, secure him in a handicapped equipped patient bathroom. Secure one hand to the safety bar mounted next to the toilet. I want to discuss that with you, Joe. If there is no safety bar, then use the pipes under the sink or anything that might serve as a hard point. No hard point, then cuff them directly to a belly chain. Also, make sure your prisoner is in leg shackles. Allow him one hand free if you must, but if you have belly chain, secure the other hand to the chain with 2 sets of cuff. That way, your prisoner has the mobility to clean himself and still remain somewhat secure. Glove up so you can escort him to the sink and wash afterwards. The door stays open or you go inside. Privacy provides opportunity, and the insistence on privacy demonstrates intent. Look at that. Privacy provides opportunity, and the insistence on privacy demonstrates intent. Don't help your prisoner escape by being fooled into giving him exactly what he wants. Yes, it's gross, unglamorous, and a drag to do business this way, but it's only safe and legal way to do it outside of building a jail cell inside every hospital emergency room in America. If you take anything away from this article, take away these points. Never leave your prisoner conscious. Well, let's get to that. Let's finish the toilet part, and then I'll read those last thoughts, and we're done. Joe, a lot of things here, so love to get your thoughts. The prisoners want to go to the bathroom. I've seen medical help with urines. I have seen that. 100%. But I'm more concerned about the number 2 because we're used to watching inmates urine all day. I mean, we do pees, we do urinalysis, whatever it is. We're used to that. I mean, we kind of give them some level of, we kind of stand a safe distance away. We're watching their hands at all times, but we're really not focusing on their private parts. We're just watching their hands to make sure they're not taking anything out of their pocket. I usually think it's done in a respectful way. Defecating is different. So what's your thoughts on going in the room with them and maybe giving them that one hand to wipe? I mean, I know it's a little bit, tough to talk about, but it's still got to be talked about because that's one of the areas of possible escape. Or the intent to escape. So what's your thoughts about that, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, that's the last part of that where you have one hand free, but everything else is restrained to a belly chain, the other hand and the 2 feet. That's our normal practice here. We're always there. We're not necessarily inside the room, but we're at the doorway monitoring the offender at all times. I think it's probably one of the best routes to go. You're definitely never going to leave them unrestrained because, for me, I've always played the what if game, no matter what area or where I was. I'm looking at, is the ceiling solid? Is it a drop ceiling where an inmate can jump up on the sink and get through the ceiling? If you leave them unrestrained or if you close the door and let him defecate by himself, there's a lot of what if possibilities you can always play. But yeah, the one hand free while the other hand's, still double cuffed and fixed to the belly chain or belly belt and shackles. That's the way to go.
Now, I noticed he said handicap bathroom because there's a bar. I mean, I'm not a real big fan of handcuffing them to a pipe. I'm just not a big fan of that. But I like the fact that he said use the handicap bathroom and then you can handcuff them to the bar. Would that be an alternative if you're in the bathroom, the guy's defecating? I mean, is that?
I mean, it could definitely be an alternative. For us here, it would be a total last resort. Like I said, because for us, affixing them to restraining them to a fixed object for us is a big no-no here. So it's actually against the law. It's called unlawful restraint down here. So it would have to be an absolute last resort. And for us to be able to do that, you would seriously, and I mean seriously have to justify yourself.
So you're definitely doing the belly chain at least, though, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely doing the belly chain with one hand free and maintaining visual at all times. Like he said, it's not the most glamorous thing, and it's not the best odoriferous thing, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, you still got to maintain custody and control of that offender. Right,
and just to, but you're definitely watching them go to the bathroom. You have to. I mean,
oh,
you have
absolutely,
to
yeah. Absolutely. I may not be directly inside that bathroom with him propped up against the sink while he's, doing his due. But I'm going to be at the doorway maintaining a visual of some
Yeah,
sort. Times.
Let me reframe that. You're not watching them go to the bathroom. You're watching them use the bathroom.
Correct.
Yeah, let's do it that way, just in case someone tries to pull a pre on me. You're watching them use the bathroom. Because here's a funny thing. Sometimes what we say doesn't translate to people that don't understand the profession.
Correct.
Joe knew what I meant.
Absolutely.
But someone might be here saying, no, guys, we're watching them use the bathroom. So let's just make sure we get the verbiage. And the last point is, if you take anything away from this article, take away these points. And I guess this will coincide with me and Joe's dialogue as well. Never leave your prisoner conscious, unrestrained, and alone all at the same time. If they have to be unrestrained, have them outnumbered. Oof. Isolate them from the public as much as humanly possible, and custody guarantees no privacy. I like that part. Custody guarantees no privacy. Surgical and diagnostic procedures may require you to adapt to the clinical environment, but they will never require you to sacrifice every security measure. If you go to the hospital, prepare and understand that it really is the weakest link in a prisoner custody. Then it's highly unlikely anyone will ever escape from. Oh, if you think that way, then it's highly unlikely anyone will ever escape from your care and custody. But again, highly unlikely. This puts the odds in your favor. It was a good dialogue. A lot of stuff here. I mean, I think the controversial part will be the restraining to what would be considered a fixed object. I mean, if the person wasn't in a belly chain, because not all of them get transported with belly chains, sadly. I guess that depends on your status, which, again, we should discuss that. Maybe that's where that fixed object in the bathroom may come into play, using the handicap bathroom to put them onto that bar if possible. But again, that's all dependent on, what your agency allows. So this is not really, this dialogue here is to put ideas that you want to push forward, but I definitely wouldn't practice any ideas here that goes against your policy and procedures. And I just want to make people think, I want people to know something real quick. Even if we agree with handcuffing somebody to a fixed object, that doesn't mean we don't value their life. That means that, that we want them to burn up in case there's a fire. I mean, I think that's one of the concerns. But it does make it safer for us to maintain control and be vigilant, because at any time something could happen, and, we are going to have to look away from the inmate to deal with a threat on the outside. And, if you're not able to secure that inmate adds to the threat. So we have to look at it from that perspective as well. Hey, Joe, what's your closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are basically make sure that you have a good working and communication relationship with your local hospital, medical facility, medical infirmary, nursing staff. Be security and correctionally aware of your surroundings at all times. Never let the outside dictate, how you conduct yourself correctionally in a security fashion. Make sure that you have total accountability yourself and your offender. Stay in constant contact with your supervision in the event that doctors order something that, may not seem correct to you or may not seem plausible to you. Never be afraid to reach out to a supervisor on duty and let them know what you got going on. If you're unsure, they will, help guide you in the right direction. Like I said, always play that what if game, regardless if you're in a hospital, correctional facility, supermarket, whatever. The things that you do at the end of the day are still going to come back to you. You're ultimately responsible for the safety and security of that offender from both aspects, his aspect and the public access. And, you're also tasked with the undaunting, illusion of protecting the public too, while you have a inmate there. So just be correctionally sound in your judgments. And if you're ever unsure, you should have supervision there that should be there at your whim and never afraid to ask you or answer your questions that you may have.
Yeah. And guys, just in closing, I mean, this is really a dialogue that we had today that's meant to start dialogue. It's not an all-inclusive dialogue, because obviously inmates can be very innovative and there's never going to be a full catch-all. But every time we have these discussions, it's just an effort to put things in your favor. That's the key. There are certain practices here that we talked about today that may not be approved, could be a bit controversial. But understand, sometimes people require the highest level of security. And, for people that don't allow us to operate at that level, maybe it's good for them to watch this dialogue to see why it's needed. Because sometimes people, they look at what they feel is the greater risk. But again, they could be weighing out likelihood versus, as I said, probability. It's likely this could happen, but is it probable? Where we look at probable, 100%. We have to make decisions in the fly related to what's the highest probability. And sometimes that means we have to overstep what's likely and just really focus on what's probable. And I think that's sometimes what the concerns are. Sometimes when we have these practices that are given to us from the outside, they look at what's likely and try to equate it with the same weight as what's probable. And then we have a concern. We have to make a decision because people are treating what's likely and what's probable as if it's the same. But when we make a decision in safety and security, we make our decision based on what's probable. Yes, it's likely they could have done that, but it's more probable, because probable is heavier, that they're going to do this. So again, I think this was a good dialogue. It may even open up a chance to revisit the fixed items. I believe a bed that moves, a wheelchair that moves is not a fixed item. I also believe that the lower level status of an inmate does not change the security measure that should be utilized on an inmate on an outside trip. Again, there should be some levels of security present regardless of what their status is. And then higher level restrictions for those that prove to be a threat, whether through their past actions or just, their actions in the prison, And for medical, who reviews these things and wants to send people out to a hospital because they don't want to deal with it within their line of work, know that this starts a great risk. So make sure that when that person goes out, you better be able to justify, yes, you doctor, yes, you medical, whoever's that supervising nurse, why that person had to be set out, because that will also be looked at. Yeah, we're looking at what happened inside the facility, but hey, why was he sent out for something that you have an infirmary could handle? It just, make sure that, because it's definitely, this is something that's a team effort. And any effort to unrestrain the inmate, remember, exhaust all measures to try not to. But the person on the floor should not make that decision. If it has to happen and medical, is telling you why and it makes sense, you got to call it up and don't make that decision lightly. Call it up, pass it up the chain of command. Make sure you have all questions in play. And then for someone that's higher up, you got to balance that. Moment you got to unstrain that individual, look for alternatives ways, like a softer way approach. But if that doesn't work, okay, don't unstrain them. Let me get a supervisor over there. Let me get another officer if available. Because if I have to unstrain that inmate, I like what he said, I'm going to outnumber him. So God forbid if the person does work around, because it happens, people can find ways to circumvent. Man, we had every measure in play, but they got the best of us. It is what it is. But you didn't catch us with our pants down. We were aware, but unfortunately, he was more prepared than we were, which could happen, sadly. As always, guys, the show is tiered. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to use. Bell could be used. Well, hit that. Wait, I got to start the whole fucking speech over again. Hold on. Thank you guys for listening. Bell, hit the bell. Bell will notify you every time. I don't know, man. It's early, I guess. But guys, if you hit the bell, we'll let you know that I posted up a video. That's all. All right, guys. Love you guys. Stay safe.